At the end of a snow-covered road in Maine, one porch light refused to go dark. Beneath it, an old German shepherd named Bishop waited for the man who never came home. His owner, Everett, had been taken away in an ambulance during a winter storm. Months passed, but Bishop still guarded the door, the bell, and the light. Then Everett's estranged brother arrived to settle the house and leave it behind. But what he found there was not just a dog waiting. It was a promise still burning in the snow. Where are you watching from tonight? Leave your thoughts below, and please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 5,000 subscribers so we can keep writing more heartfelt stories. Winter came to Brightwater Ridge in the cleanest way at first, as if the sky had decided to make everything forgiven. Snow rested on the roofs of the lake houses in soft white layers. The old boat docks wore caps of frost. The frozen surface of Lake Marrow caught the weak morning sun and threw it back in pale silver flashes, so bright that people walking along the shore had to narrow their eyes. From a distance, the town looked almost peaceful enough to be unreal. Narrow roads climbing between dark pines, chimneys breathing slowly, porches trimmed with old Christmas lights that some families never bothered to take down, and weathered homes sitting apart from one another with wide white yards between them. But anyone who had survived more than one Maine winter knew beauty could be a gentle mask over danger. A pretty storm could close a road. A bright morning could leave black ice under fresh powder. A quiet night could make a lonely house colder than anyone outside imagined. At the far end of Harbor Lane, where the road bent toward the frozen lake and then lost interest in going any farther, stood Everett Hayes's house. It was a small white wooden place with peeling paint near the window frames, a narrow porch, and a roof that sagged just enough to suggest many winters had leaned on it without asking permission. Beside the steps sat a covered stack of split wood, arranged with a precision that looked less like neatness and more like discipline. A brass windbell hung under the porch beam, its surface darkened by years of salt air and snow. A low cord dangled from it, tied within reach of a dog's mouth. Everett Hayes had put that cord there himself. He was 67, a former serviceman, broad in the chest once, narrower now from age, heart trouble, and the kind of stubbornness that made a man keep doing chores long after his body had begun filing complaints. He had thick silver hair usually flattened by a navy knit cap, a square face worn red by wind off the lake, and gray stubble he shaved only when it annoyed him more than the razor did. People in Brightwater Ridge did not call Everett warm. They called him reliable, which in a winter town sometimes meant more. If your furnace died during a storm, Everett would show up with tools and insult the furnace until it worked. If your porch steps froze, he would scatter salt before sunrise and leave no note. If you thanked him, he would look offended, as if gratitude were a poor use of breath in cold weather. His porch light was the thing everyone knew best. When snow began to fall hard, Everett left it burning all night. The yellow glow spread across the front steps, the gate, and the road beyond, small but steady against the dark. Drivers who got stuck near the lake knew they could knock. Old neighbors who lost power knew there would be hot coffee, a chair near the stove, and a man who would pretend their arrival had ruined his evening. Everett never called it kindness. Letting somebody freeze outside is more trouble than opening the door, he would say, as though mercy were simply a practical shortcut. The only creature who saw Everett without that rough covering was Bishop, his old German shepherd. Bishop was 9, black and tan, with a golden chest, a dark saddle across his back, and a muzzle silvered almost white around the mouth. His left ear stood straight, always listening. His right ear bent slightly at the tip, giving him a solemn, weather-worn expression. His back right leg had stiffened over the years, and when he rose from the rug by the stove, he did it in stages, front paws first, shoulders next, then the hind legs as if asking the floor whether it could be trusted. Around his neck he wore an old brown leather collar with a small brass tag shaped like a porch light. The tag had been scratched until the engraving could barely be read, but Everett knew the letters by touch. Bishop, E.H. Bishop went where Everett went. Not fast anymore, not proudly as he might have in younger years, but with the quiet commitment of an old friend who understood the route mattered more than speed. In the mornings, Everett fed the stove while Bishop watched from the kitchen doorway. At noon, Bishop followed him to the woodshed, pausing by the steps if his leg ached. In the evenings, when the weather turned mean, Bishop lay just inside the front door, while Everett checked the porch light and the bell cord. The bell had begun as a joke, though Everett would never have admitted it. Across the road lived Lydia Bramwell, a woman of 63 with flour on her sleeves more often than not, and a way of looking at people that made Liz feel underdressed. She baked bread and pies for half the town from the back kitchen of her blue house, and she had a habit of checking on Everett whenever smoke did not rise from his chimney by 8 in the morning. Everett hated being checked on. Lydia ignored that as easily as she ignored bad weather. One winter, after Everett slipped on the porch and bruised his hip badly enough to curse in full sentences, Lydia threatened to walk over twice a day unless he gave her some kind of signal that he was alive. Everett responded by hanging the brass bell and teaching Bishop to tug the cord. "There," he told Lydia afterward, "if I die, the dog can ring for pastries." Lydia had laughed, but her eyes had softened when Bishop pulled the rope and the bell gave a clear, trembling note across the snowy road. Over the years, that sound became part of Harbor Lane, not dramatic, not sacred, just practical. If the bell rang once in the morning, Lydia knew Everett was up. If it rang too many times, she looked out the window. On the afternoon the storm came. The light had a strange brightness beneath the clouds. Snow had been falling since noon, not heavy at first, only a steady powder moving through the pines and softening the tire tracks along Harbor Lane. By 3, the wind rose off the lake. By 4, the road had begun to vanish. Everett brought in extra wood, muttering to Bishop that weather reports were written by people who had never met weather personally. He stamped snow from his boots, hung his coat by the door, and moved to the stove with an armful of split birch. Bishop lay on the worn rug near the kitchen, watching. He knew the shape of Everett's ordinary movements, the bend at the knees, the grunt when lifting wood, the short pause before striking a match. But that afternoon, something changed between one breath and the next. Everett set a log beside the stove and stopped. His hand went to the center of his chest, not quickly, not theatrically, just with a small, confused pressure, as if he had found a pain there that did not belong to him. Bishop lifted his head. Everett tried to straighten. The room seemed to tilt around him. He reached for the counter, missed the edge, caught it with his fingertips, and knocked a tin cup to the floor. It struck the boards with a sharp metallic sound that made Bishop stand too fast for his bad leg. Everett breathed once, hard. His face had gone pale under the weathered red of his skin. "No," he whispered, though whether he spoke to the pain, the dog, or the empty room, even he might not have known. He tried to turn toward the wall phone near the hallway. His left foot dragged. His shoulder struck the chair. Bishop moved around him in alarm, whining now, his old body suddenly uncertain of every rule it had trusted. Everett reached out, fingers stretching toward the phone cord, but the distance had become impossible. He sank to one knee, then to both. The second hand of the kitchen clock moved with a soft click. Outside, snow struck the windows in dry bursts. Everett fell sideways onto the floor. For a moment Bishop froze. Dogs do not understand death as humans name it, but they know when the body they love has become wrong. Everett smelled of fear, salt, cold wool, and something sharp beneath the skin. Bishop pushed his muzzle against Everett's cheek. He licked the corner of his mouth. He nudged his shoulder. Everett's eyes opened halfway, unfocused, and found him. "Bell," Everett breathed. It was not a command in the old clear tone. It was barely a word. But Bishop knew the shape of it. He knew the porch, the cord, the ringing note that brought Lydia to the window. He turned, nails scraping across the floorboards, and forced his stiff leg into motion. At the front door, he pawed once, twice, then shoved his nose against the gap until it opened enough for wind to burst through. Snow came in sideways. Bishop limped onto the porch and seized the cord in his teeth. The bell rang. Once, twice, again. The sound was thin and bright beneath the storm, but the wind tore at it, scattered it, carried it away toward the lake instead of across the road. Bishop pulled harder. The bell shook wildly. Inside, Everett lay on the kitchen floor, one hand curled near his chest. Across Harbor Lane, Lydia Bramwell was taking bread from the oven. The kitchen windows steamed white. the storm beating so loudly at the glass that the bell became no more than a ghost of sound. She paused once, head turning, then frowned, unsure if she had heard anything at all. Bishop released the cord. For the first time in years, the signal had failed. He stood on the porch, snow gathering along his back, old eyes fixed on Lydia's blurred yellow window. Behind him, Everett made a sound too weak to be called out. Bishop looked once toward the kitchen, once toward the road. The distance between the two houses was not far on a clear day. In a storm, with an old leg and a body built more for loyalty than speed now, it looked like the whole world. Then Bishop stepped off the porch. He hit the snow hard, stumbled, recovered, and pushed forward. Wind shoved against his side. Powder filled his eyes. His paws broke through crust and sank. He crossed the yard, past the low fence, and entered the road where tire tracks were already disappearing. Halfway across, a gust nearly knocked his hindquarters sideways. Bishop lowered his head and kept moving. By the time he reached Lydia's porch, his breathing had become rough, but he did not stop at the steps. He threw his body against the door and barked. Inside, Lydia dropped the bread towel. The bark came again, hoarse and urgent, nothing like Bishop's usual deep greeting. She opened the door and cold flooded the kitchen. Bishop stood there with snow packed along his shoulders, eyes wide, muzzle lifted toward her. He barked once, turned, took 2 steps into the storm, then looked back. "Everett," Lydia said. Bishop barked again. Lydia did not waste another second. She grabbed her coat from the chair, shoved her feet into boots, and called through the side window toward the neighboring shed, where Otto Klein was repairing a cracked oar he had no reason to repair except that his hands did not like being idle. Otto was nearly 70, barrel-chested, bent slightly from a lifetime around boats, with a short white beard and a face permanently narrowed against wind. He came out with a metal flashlight in one hand before Lydia finished shouting. They followed Bishop across the road. Lydia slipped once and caught herself on Otto's sleeve. Bishop kept turning back, making sure they were coming, then pushing ahead. At Everett's house, the front door stood partly open, snow blowing into the entryway. Lydia reached the kitchen first and saw Everett on the floor. "Oh, Everett," she whispered, and all the sharpness went out of her voice. Otto was already moving. He knelt, checked for breath, then looked at Lydia. "Call it in, now." Lydia ran to the phone and gave the address with a steadiness that broke only once. Bishop pressed close to Everett's side, whining low, trying to fit his body against the man's legs as if warmth could repair what had gone wrong. Everett's eyes opened again. His gaze moved from Lydia to Otto, then down to Bishop. His fingers twitched once against the dog's fur. "Good boy," he breathed. The ambulance came slower than hope wanted and faster than weather should have allowed. Its red lights appeared at the bend, like something wounded moving through the white. 2 paramedics entered with snow on their shoulders and urgency in their hands. They worked around the cramped kitchen, asking questions Lydia answered when she could. Heart history, medication, time found, breathing, conscious. Otto stood by the door, jaw tight, holding Bishop by the collar, when the dog tried to push between the paramedics and Everett. Everett was lifted onto the stretcher wrapped in emergency blankets. He was still alive. That fact moved through the room like a fragile flame. Bishop followed as far as the porch, then down the steps, pulling hard despite his old leg. The paramedics loaded Everett into the ambulance. Bishop tried to jump after him. His front paws struck the metal edge, claws scraping, body shaking with the need to stay with the only person who made sense. "No, boy," Otto said, voice rougher than he meant. He caught Bishop around the chest and held him back. "Road's too bad. They have to go." Bishop struggled once, not angrily, but with a desperation that made Lydia cover her mouth. Inside the ambulance, Everett's hand shifted under the blanket. For one brief second, his fingers appeared at the edge, trembling in the red light. Bishop saw them. He stopped fighting. The doors closed. The siren rose. The ambulance pulled away, tires cutting through deep snow, red light flashing over Lydia's face, Otto's coat, the white fence, the brass bell under the porch. Bishop stood in the road until the lights blurred, then faded, then vanished around the bend toward town. Everett Hayes died before the ambulance reached the hospital. Bishop did not know that. He knew only what the world had shown him. Everett had been taken from the house, still breathing. Everett had gone down the road in a storm. Everett had left with strangers and blankets and red lights, the way humans sometimes left and returned when work, weather, or pain delayed them. So Bishop waited where waiting made sense. The storm deepened into evening. Lydia tried to coax him inside. Otto brought a blanket. Bishop accepted neither at first. He returned to the porch, lowered himself slowly onto the snow-dusted boards, and placed his silver muzzle toward the road. The porch light burned above him, yellow and steady, spreading a small circle of warmth over a world gone white. Behind him, the bell cord swayed in the wind. Ahead of him, the bend in Harbor Lane swallowed every sound. Bishop did not sleep. He watched the road for the vehicle that had taken Everett away, certain, in the simple, faithful chambers of his heart, that any door which closed could open again, any light that vanished could return, and any man who had ever told him to stay would come back to release him. 3 months changed Brightwater Ridge without making it less beautiful. The storm that had taken Everett Hayes away passed into town memory the way hard weather often did, first as emergency, then as story, then as something people mentioned softly when they drove by the White House at the end of Harbor Lane. Winter settled deeper after that. Snow stacked itself along fences and porch rails, smoothing the rough edges of old yards. The frozen lake shone on clear mornings with a brightness so clean it almost hurt to look at. Smoke rose straight from chimneys when the air went still, and on the coldest days every sound seemed sharpened. Shovel against step, truck chains against packed ice, crows breaking from the pines, the small crack of tree limbs under the weight of frost. Brightwater Ridge looked peaceful from a distance. Up close, it had learned to speak carefully around one house. Bishop remained there. At first people told themselves he was wading through confusion. Dogs needed time. Animals understood absence differently. A few days, maybe a week, and hunger or cold would persuade him to accept a warm kitchen somewhere else. Lydia Bramwell believed this because she wanted to. She had stood in Everett's kitchen after the ambulance left, holding the towel she had used to wipe melted snow from the floor, and told herself Bishop would come around once the house stopped smelling so strongly of Everett. But houses did not surrender a man quickly. Everett's work coat still hung by the door. His boots still sat beneath the bench with dried salt along the seams. The stove still held the faint scent of birch smoke. The brass bell still waited under the porch beam, and every morning Bishop placed himself beneath it as though reporting for duty. He did not starve himself in a dramatic way. That would have made decisions easier. He ate just enough to keep everyone worried instead of certain. Some mornings Lydia crossed the road with warm water wrapped in a dish towel and soft food mashed into a shallow bowl. Bishop would lift his head when she approached, his amber-brown eyes tired but polite. He accepted her hand against his brow. He sometimes licked the water once or twice. On better days he took 3 careful mouthfuls of food. On worse days he lowered his muzzle, breathed in the smell, and turned his face toward the road where the ambulance lights had disappeared months before. "You old heartbreaker," Lydia would whisper, though she said it without blame. She was a small woman with flour often caught at her cuffs and a red scarf that made her easy to see against the snow. Before Everett died, she had checked on him with the brisk irritation of a neighbor who refused to let stubborn men become frozen furniture. Afterward, she checked on Bishop with a gentleness that frightened her. It was easier to scold a living man than to comfort a dog who had not accepted death. Otto Klein came too, though never at the same hour 2 days in a row, because he disliked looking predictable. He had repaired a broken stormboard on Everett's porch before anyone asked. Then he added a sheet of clear plastic along the windward side, muttering that it was temporary, which in Otto's language meant he expected it to last until spring if the nails behaved. His broad hands, cracked from years of boat work and cold water, moved with a rough care whenever he adjusted the straw near Bishop's resting place. He never spoke to the dog in a sweet voice. He said things like, "You're blocking the draft wrong," or "Shift over, old man," and Bishop sometimes obeyed him, which Otto pretended not to find moving. The third regular visitor was Mabel Crane, who owned the town grocery and had the habit of making kindness sound like inventory management. She was 66, round-faced, sharp-eyed, with short silver curls that escaped from beneath a plum-colored winter hat. Her right wrist was often wrapped in cloth, because arthritis had begun stealing strength from her fingers. But she still carried boxes with her left hand and complained if anyone offered to help. Twice a week she left a tin of soft food near the porch, always labeled in thick black marker, for the porch boy. She claimed it was because nobody liked waste, and Bishop was technically consuming store property. Lydia never challenged the lie. Dr. Helen Ashford arrived when the roads allowed. She was the only veterinarian within easy reach of Brightwater Ridge, a compact woman in her 50s with chestnut hair tied low, green-gray eyes that could quiet a room without raising her voice, and a gray canvas medical bag marked with a worn paw print patch. Bishop respected Helen. He allowed her to lift his paws, check the stiffness in his right hind leg, listen to his heart, examine his teeth, and press along the muscles that had tightened from sleeping too many nights in cold air. When the exam was done, Helen always sat beside him for a minute without touching him, letting the old dog decide whether closeness was still welcome. "He can't keep losing weight like this," she told Lydia one morning while Bishop rested under the porch roof, his head turned toward the bend in the road. "He's eating some. Some isn't the same as enough. I know that." Helen looked at the house, then at the brass bell, then at Bishop's narrow shoulders beneath the thick winter coat. "His body is old, his joints hurt, his heart is working harder than it should. And grief doesn't show up on a chart, but it spends the body all the same." Lydia folded her arms tightly. "So what do we do?" Helen's answer took too long. "We keep him warm, we keep him fed, we don't confuse force with mercy unless there's no other choice." There had been attempts. No one in Brightwater Ridge liked admitting how many. The first came from a retired couple in Vermont who had heard about Bishop through a rescue group. They arrived in a clean Subaru with folded blankets, a padded harness, and kind faces already arranged for sorrow. The woman knelt in the snow and let Bishop smell her gloves. Bishop touched his nose to her sleeve. He even leaned briefly against her knee. Everyone watching from across the road held their breath. Then the man opened the back of the car and lifted the harness. Bishop changed without growling. His body went still. He stepped backward once, then again, until his shoulder touched the front door. His ears lowered, not in fear, but in refusal. When the woman reached for his collar, Bishop turned his head away, walked to the porch boards beneath the bell, and lay down with his body between her and the door. The couple left with the blankets still folded. A senior dog rescue outside Portland called the following week. A volunteer drove out to assess him, a gentleman with soft boots and a voice careful enough not to startle birds. He sat on Everett's porch for nearly an hour, talking to Bishop about heated floors, fenced yards, other old dogs, medication schedules, and people who would never let him sleep in snow. Bishop listened with grave attention. When the volunteer clipped a leash to his collar, Bishop stood. For one hopeful moment, Lydia thought he might go. He took 4 steps down the path, stopped at the gate, looked toward the road, then slowly sat in the snow, not collapsed, not panicked, sat, as if he had reached the border of what love allowed and could not cross it. That moment changed how people spoke about him. Before, they had said Bishop would not leave. After that, they began saying Bishop could not leave, and the difference made everything harder. The morning bell became the thread that held Harbor Lane together. It was never loud. In calm weather, it rang clear and bright, a small metal note traveling across the road to Lydia's kitchen window. Bishop would tug the cord once, release it, and lower himself beneath the porch light. The first time he did it after Everett's death, Lydia had dropped a spoon into a bowl of batter and stood completely still. She had almost crossed the road in a panic, thinking something was wrong. Then she saw Bishop sitting beneath the bell, looking not at her but at the road, and understood with a pain so quiet she could not speak of it for days. Everett had taught him that signal because men grew old, hips slipped, phones sat too far away, and neighbors needed a practical excuse to care. Bishop did not know the arrangement had changed. Or perhaps he knew and continued anyway, because habit was the last language Everett had left him. Each morning the bell rang, Lydia looked out. When Lydia looked out, Otto noticed her at the window and checked his own stove. When Otto crossed the road, Mabel asked whether Bishop had eaten. When Mabel came by, she stopped at Graham Voss's cabin on the way back because his smoke looked thin. No one planned it, no one called it a system, but from one old dog's mouth on a bell cord, a neighborhood began checking its own pulse. One morning in late January, the bell did not ring. Lydia waited through the first gray light, telling herself Bishop was tired, that the cold had stiffened his leg, that not every silence was an emergency. She poured coffee. She burned toast. She wiped a counter that was already clean. At 8:30, she put on her coat and crossed Harbor Lane so quickly she forgot her gloves. Bishop was not under the porch beam. For one terrible second, the whole winter seemed to empty around her. Then she heard a faint scrape near the side steps. Bishop stood beside Everett's woodpile, trembling with effort, his teeth closed around the bell cord. It had come loose from the hook during the night and fallen into the snow. The old dog had dragged it halfway around the porch, trying to return it to the place where it belonged. Lydia knelt in front of him. Oh, Bishop. He did not release the cord until Otto arrived with a ladder and rehung it. When the bell finally sounded again, thin and imperfect in the morning air, Bishop closed his eyes. Lydia had to turn away before either Otto or the dog saw her face. By February, the problem of the house became something no amount of stew, straw, or soft food could solve. It began with an envelope from the town office, sealed in plastic and tucked between the front door and frame because there was no one inside to receive it. Mabel noticed it first when she came to leave Bishop's food. She read the town seal and went still. Lydia took it to Irene Bell, who worked in the Brightwater Ridge municipal office and knew every old property dispute, overdue water bill, and winter complaint within 20 miles. Irene was a thin woman of 61 with a straight back, a silver bob, and a pair of reading glasses she wore low on her nose when the news was unpleasant. She was not cold, though people often mistook precision for lack of feeling. She unfolded the notice at her desk and read it twice before speaking.
It's the tax lien, she said.
Lydia sat across from her, hands clasped in her lap. How bad? Bad enough that I wish Everett had called me before it reached this point. He wouldn't have. No, Irene said, softer. He wouldn't. The debt was not simple, and that somehow made it sadder. Everett had fallen behind after a string of ordinary disasters, the kind that did not make headlines because they arrived wearing work boots and invoices, a minor hospital stay after a fall, prescription costs, Bishop's joint medication, roof damage from an early freeze, heating oil that rose in price at exactly the wrong time. A few payments made quietly on behalf of neighbors who had never known where the help came from. Everett had intended to sell the old boat behind Otto's shed to cover the difference. There was a note about it in his file, written in his blunt hand, sell boat before March, Paytown fix porch rail. March had not waited for him. Can we pay it? Lydia asked. Irene removed her glasses. People can contribute, but that won't stop the process unless the legal heir signs the paperwork and settles the balance. The property is already in the final stage before auction transfer. Action, Lydia repeated, as if the word belonged to another language. I'm sorry. What happens to Bishop? Irene looked down at the notice. That was the one question not written anywhere on the official paper, and therefore the one that mattered most. Legally, he's not part of the property. Practically, she did not finish. By afternoon, the notice was posted on Everett's front door in a clear plastic sleeve. Snow began falling again, softly, making the black printed words look even harsher against the white paint. Mabel read it and pressed one hand to her wrapped wrist. Otto stood with his jaw tight, saying nothing, because he had reached the edge of what repair could do. Helen arrived near dusk, checked Bishop, and then read the notice while the old dog lay beneath the bell. He won't survive being dragged from here like a piece of furniture, Lydia said. Helen crouched and ran a gentle hand along Bishop's neck. Then we need the person who has the right to choose better. Finding Roland Hayes was not easy. Everett's records were old and the brothers had not spoken in 19 years. The first address led to a returned letter. The second phone number belonged to a disconnected line. Irene searched what town records allowed. Helen called a veterans clinic that could not share details, but promised to pass along a message if they had a current contact. Lydia found an old Christmas card in Everett's kitchen drawer. unsigned and never mailed, addressed to Roland in New Hampshire. The envelope had yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was Everett's. In the end, it was Irene who confirmed the name through estate paperwork. Roland Hayes, 58, former service member, last known somewhere near North Conway, New Hampshire. Not a son, not a friend, a brother. A brother who had been absent so long that half of Brightwater Ridge had not known Everett had one. That evening, after the calls were made and messages left with people who might know Roland, Harbor Lane grew quiet under a pale blue dusk. The notice remained on the door. The porch light came on automatically because Otto had fixed the timer after Everett died. Bishop lay beneath it with the brass tag at his collar catching a small flash of yellow. At exactly the hour when Everett used to check the road, Bishop lifted his head. A truck passed far away on the county road, its sound muffled by snow and distance. Bishop listened until it faded. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached for the bell cord and rang it once. Across the road, Lydia stood at her window and watched him. Behind her, bread cooled untouched on the counter. The sound moved over Harbor Lane, fragile but clear, and for the first time since Everett's death, it did not feel like a signal saying, "I am still here." It felt like a question sent into the cold. Who is coming now? Roland Hayes reached Brightwater Ridge just after noon, when the winter sun had climbed high enough to make the snow glare, but not warm enough to soften it. His old gray pickup came slowly along the county road with a tow chain clinking in the bed, a steel toolbox strapped behind the cab, and 2 cardboard boxes sliding softly whenever the tires found a rut beneath the packed ice. The truck looked like it had survived more winters than it had been designed for. So did the man driving it. Roland sat straight behind the wheel, one hand steady at the top, the other resting near the gear shift as if he expected the road to argue with him. He was 58, tall and broad-shouldered, with a body still shaped by old discipline rather than comfort. His hair was cut in a neat undercut. Dark ash brown through the top but silvered cleanly at the temples, and his face had the hard, handsome angles of a man who had been young in difficult places and had not completely returned from them. He wore no beard. The clean jaw, the firm mouth, the blue-gray eyes beneath his brow made him look less approachable than he was, though in truth Roland himself had never been sure whether approachability was worth the maintenance. He had dressed for the trip as if weather were a mechanical problem. An olive-drab combat shirt fitted close beneath a charcoal field jacket, the camouflage sleeves visible at his wrists when he adjusted the heater vents. Dark cargo pants, black tactical boots, leather gloves worn smooth at the palms. On his left wrist sat an old military watch with a black face and gray fabric band, which he checked too often for a man who had nowhere he wanted to arrive. The watch had been with him through more years than most people had. It did not comfort him. It simply kept going, which Roland respected. The town appeared smaller than he expected. A grocery with frost in the corners of the windows. A diner with 2 pickups outside and exhaust rising straight into the cold. A municipal office set back behind a line of plowed snow. A few houses with smoke lifting from their chimneys, and beyond them the frozen brightness of Lake Marrow. Brightwater Ridge looked like the kind of place postcards tried to sell to people who had never been trapped in one. Roland slowed near the town office, glanced at the address written on the envelope beside him, then kept driving toward Harbor Lane. He had not come because grief called him. Grief was too clean a word for what had happened when Irene Bell's message finally found him through an old veteran's contact and a mechanic 2 towns over who still had his number. Everett is gone. Property in final tax lien stage. Legal heir signature required. Those were facts. Roland preferred facts. They did not ask why 19 years had passed without a visit, without a call that lasted longer than anger, without any attempt to learn whether the man he had once called brother still woke before dawn, still drank coffee too hot, still hated asking for help. Facts did not ask why the news of Everett's death had reached a distant cousin before it reached him. Facts did not look like accusation when spoken aloud. Diane Mercer had handled the body. That much Roland had learned on the phone from a funeral director in Vermont whose voice had been courteous enough to make Roland want to hang up. Diane, a second cousin or something close enough for paperwork and far enough for silence, had been the only emergency contact the hospital could reach after Everett died on the way in. She had signed for cremation, arranged transport to the family cemetery in Vermont, paid what needed paying, and gone back to her own life. Roland did not blame her exactly. Blame required a closeness neither of them had earned. Still, the thought of Everett leaving Brightwater Ridge in a box of ashes before his own brother even knew he was dead sat somewhere behind Roland's ribs like a small piece of metal. His phone buzzed as he turned onto Harbor Lane. He let it ring twice before answering through the truck speaker. "You there yet?" Caleb Danner asked. Caleb's voice always sounded like it came from under a lifted hood, blunt, metallic, impatient with anything emotional. He and Roland rented 2 bays in a garage outside North Conway, fixing plows, farm trucks, and the vehicles of people who believed maintenance was a rumor. Caleb had a square face, a reddish beard going gray, and no talent for gentleness unless an engine was involved. He had also kept Roland employed when no one else asked why a former service member with a steady hand and bad sleep wanted to work alone. "Almost," Roland said. "You sound thrilled." "I'm not sightseeing." "No, you're driving 4 hours to sign papers for a dead brother you never talked about, and a house that may or may not be worth the taxes attached to it. That's completely normal." Roland's jaw tightened. "Say what you need to say." Caleb exhaled hard. "The landlord wants the roof deposit by the end of the week. If we don't get the front bay fixed, he'll rent it to those snowmobile guys. I can cover part, not all." "You said you had your share." "I do. You still going to?" Roland looked ahead. Harbor Lane narrowed between pines, the snowbanks high enough to hide the lower fences. "I said I would." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I've got." For a moment there was only static and tire hum. Then Caleb's voice dropped a little. "Roland, don't let old family mess eat your future. Handle it. Get back." Roland ended the call without replying. He told himself Caleb was right. That was the clean shape of the day. Inspect the property. Confirm the tax balance. Sign what needed signing. Arrange for the dog to go somewhere competent and warm. Return to New Hampshire with his savings intact, his garage plan alive, and no more of Everett's unfinished life stuck to his boots. The white house came into view at the end of the road. Roland recognized it before he wanted to, not because he had been there recently. He had never visited Everett in Brightwater Ridge. But the house had the look of places Everett would choose, modest, practical, stubbornly maintained where it mattered, and indifferent where appearances were concerned. The front porch leaned slightly, but the woodpile was stacked square. The paint was peeling, but the storm boards were properly fitted. A brass bell hung under the porch beam. A yellow porch light burned despite the daylight, dull against the glare of snow, and beneath it lay the dog. Bishop looked at first like part of the house's shadow, black and tan against the boards, his muzzle silver, his body folded into the sheltered corner. Roland stopped the truck but did not get out immediately. The engine ticked, snow creaked under the tires. On the front door, a plastic-sleeved notice moved lightly in the wind. The dog lifted his head. Roland had prepared himself for barking, fear, maybe aggression. An old German shepherd guarding a dead man's house could be difficult. He had dealt with difficult. Difficult had instructions. Bishop did not bark. He watched the truck with a stillness that made Roland more uncomfortable than noise would have. Then the dog pushed himself up slowly, his back right leg stiff, his body pausing to gather strength before descending the porch steps. "Easy?" Roland muttered, though the windows were closed. He opened the door and stepped into the cold. The sound of his boots on the packed snow seemed too loud. Bishop came forward with care, not rushing, not wagging like a dog welcoming company, not lowering himself like a frightened one. He stopped a few feet away and took in Roland from the ground up, boots first. Then the hem of his cargo pants, the gloves, the jacket, the oil, road salt, metal, old wool, truck cab coffee, and something beneath all of that which no human would have named quickly enough. Family does not smell like memory to people. To a dog, perhaps it does. Bishop stepped closer. Roland did not reach down. He had not touched a dog with intention in years. Animals had a way of accepting what people complicated, and Roland distrusted easy acceptance. Bishop sniffed his left glove, then the bare edge of wrist where the jacket had pulled back from the watch. His breath warmed the skin there for 1 second. Then he lifted his silver muzzle and pressed it into Roland's palm. The touch was not joyful. That was what made it worse. It was solemn, careful, devastatingly patient. Bishop did not mistake him for Everett. There was no frantic confusion in him, no sudden relief. He simply found something familiar in a man who had arrived late and decided, with the dangerous mercy of animals, not to withhold trust. Roland's fingers closed awkwardly against the fur between Bishop's eyes. "I'm not him," he said under his breath. Bishop blinked once, as if that had never been the point. A door opened across the road. Roland turned and saw a woman coming toward him through the snow, with a red scarf wrapped around her neck and a covered bowl tucked beneath one arm. Lydia Bramwell was smaller than he expected, but she moved with the determination of someone who had crossed that road too many times to be stopped by weather or strangers. Flour dust marked one sleeve of her coat. Her face was round, wind-reddened, and tired in a way that made kindness look expensive. "You must be Roland Hayes," she said. "That depends who's asking." "Lydia Bramwell. I live across the road." Roland glanced at the bowl. "You feeding him? When he lets me." Bishop had not moved away from Roland's hand. That fact made Lydia's expression change before she could hide it. Not surprise exactly, something more painful. Hope, perhaps, which Roland disliked because hope had no respect for schedules. "He's been here the whole time?" Roland asked. "Since the ambulance?" The word cut more cleanly than he expected. Roland looked back toward the road, then at the dog. "The hospital said Everett died before arrival." "He was alive when they took him," Lydia said. "Bishop saw that. That's what he knows." Roland let his hand fall from the dog's head. "Dogs don't understand paperwork." "No," Lydia said. "They understand doors, roads, voices, and who did or didn't come back." The wind moved across the yard. Roland looked at the plastic notice on the door. "I'm here to deal with the house." "I know, and the dog." Lydia's mouth tightened. "People have tried. I read the messages. Reading them isn't the same as standing here." There it was, the town judgment, quiet but waiting. Roland felt irritation rise because irritation was useful. It gave him a place to stand. A dog can't hold property against a tax lien. Lydia did not flinch. "No, but sometimes a dog keeps the last part of a man that the living misplaced." Roland looked at her sharply. She had not said it cruelly. That made it harder to dismiss. Bishop turned away from both of them and limped back toward the porch, as though the conversation had reached a point where humans would need time to catch up. Roland found the key exactly where Irene had told him it might be, inside a magnetic box under the old metal mailbox. Everett had always believed hiding places were for the comfort of honest people, not the prevention of theft. The door stuck once before opening. Cold air from inside met the cold outside, older and stiller. The house smelled of wood smoke that had faded but not vanished, dust, coffee grounds, dog fur, and the dry cedar scent of split logs. Roland stood in the entry longer than necessary. Everett's brown work coat hung from a peg to the left. Beneath it sat boots with salt dried around the soles. A pair of gloves lay on the bench, one palm patched with black tape. Everything was ordinary. That was the cruelty of it. Roland had expected death to announce itself with disorder. Instead, the house looked as if Everett had stepped out for a chore and expected the stove to still be warm when he returned. Lydia remained at the threshold. "I'll leave the bowl here. I can feed him." She studied him, not unkindly. Can and will are different. Roland almost told her to go home. Instead, he said, "I've handled dogs. Bishop isn't something to handle." Then she set the covered bowl on the small table by the door and left, pulling it closed gently behind her. Alone, Roland moved through the house the way he inspected vehicles, room by room, noting condition, damage, function. Kitchen first, old but clean, sink empty, stove swept, one mug by the rack, canned soup in the cupboard, coffee tin half full, dog food sealed in a metal bin, living room, worn recliner, side table with a lamp, radio, stack of repair manuals, no photographs displayed except one small frame turned face down on a shelf, hallway, bathroom, bedroom door closed. Roland did not open it yet. He returned to the kitchen and found the papers on the table held down by a carpenter's pencil. Power bill, pharmacy receipt, veterinary invoice for joint medication, property tax notice. A smaller envelope from the funeral home in Vermont, already opened. Diane Mercer's name was printed on the return line. Roland touched it. then withdrew his hand as if paper could burn. Beside the papers lay a black notebook, its cover worn soft at the corners. On the front, in Everett's slanted block letters, were 3 words, porch light list. Roland opened it, expecting a list of repairs. He found names. Lydia, check smoke if no bell by 8. Otto, bad knee, dock shed roof. Leaks Mabel, wrist. Back door sticks, leaves salt by rear step. Graham Voss, heater intake. Wood low when cold snaps last more than 2 days. Old couple near Pine Cut, batteries. Irene, office generator cranky, hates damp. Beneath each name were notes written without sentiment. Fuse box, oil tank, loose rail. Lives alone proud, won't call, knock anyway. Roland turned the page. More names, more practical warnings, weather patterns. Who had a spare key hidden under a bird bath. Who needed medication picked up if roads closed. Who pretended not to need help until the help became too late to offer cleanly. The room seemed to shift around him, not dramatically. The stove did not roar to life. No hidden confession fell from the pages. There was only Everett's blunt handwriting and the accumulating evidence of a life Roland had reduced to one old argument. Everett had not filled the notebook like a saint. He had filled it like a mechanic, making sure fragile systems did not fail in cold weather. Bishop entered without sound except the uneven click of his nails. He had pushed the door open with his nose, or perhaps Roland had not shut it properly. Snow dusted his back. He walked past Roland to the kitchen rug and lowered himself with a tired breath, facing the hallway rather than the stove. Roland looked from the dog to the notebook. "You knew all this," he said. Bishop's ear shifted at the sound of his voice. Roland almost laughed, but there was no humor strong enough to carry it. He closed the notebook, then opened it again because closing it felt too much like refusing to look. For 19 years, he had kept Everett simple in his mind. The brother who stayed, the brother who judged, the brother who turned silence into a wall and made Roland feel like leaving was a crime no service record could pardon. It had been easier that way. A simple Everett could be resented from a distance. This Everett, with his porch light list and dog medication paid in cash and notes beside the names of proud old neighbors, was much more inconvenient. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, was a smaller note in Everett's hand. Sell boat before March. Paytown. Fix porch rail. Don't forget Bishop's pills. Roland read it twice. Outside, the porch light burned in the bright afternoon, unnecessary and stubborn. Bishop rested his chin on his paws, eyes half closed, exhausted by waiting yet unwilling to abandon it. Roland stood in his dead brother's kitchen with a tax notice on the door, a notebook full of other people's needs on the table, and an old dog who had pressed his muzzle into his hand as if blood still meant something after 19 years of silence. For the first time since the call found him, Roland understood that Everett had not merely left a house behind. He had left a place people had been using as shelter without ever naming it that, and somehow everyone on Harbor Lane seemed to know what Everett had built here. Except the one man who should have known him best. Roland lowered himself slowly into the kitchen chair. The wood creaked under his weight. Bishop opened his eyes. "I'm only here to settle this," Roland said, but the sentence sounded weak in the room, as if the house had already heard stronger lies from better men. Bishop did not move. He simply watched him with that old, patient gaze, and the brass tag shaped like a porch light rested against his collar, catching one small piece of winter sun. The municipal office in Brightwater Ridge sat behind the diner and across from a row of maples that had gone black and bare beneath the winter sky. It was not an impressive building. A low brick rectangle, 1 flagpole, 3 narrow windows, and a hand-painted sign that had probably been meant to look welcoming before the weather faded half the blue from the letters. Roland Hayes parked beside a snowbank taller than the truck's hood and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to metal tick under cold air. The envelope from the town office lay on the passenger seat. The tax notice was folded inside it, though he had already read the words enough times to know them without looking. Final delinquency, lien processing, auction transfer pending, legal air action required. The phrases had a clean brutality Roland almost respected. They made loss sound organized. Inside, the office smelled of old paper, wet wool, floor polish, and coffee that had been sitting too long. A woman at the front desk looked up. recognized his name before he gave it, and pointed him toward the back. Irene Bell's office door was open. She sat at a metal desk arranged with the kind of precision Roland associated with people who had seen too many preventable problems and learned to stack them neatly. She was 61, thin, straight-backed, with a silver bob tucked behind one ear and reading glasses resting low on her nose. Her cardigan was burgundy, her blouse cream, and her expression carried the uneasy courtesy of someone about to explain how mercy could not be entered into the county system. "Mr. Hayes," she said, standing. "Roland. Irene Bell." She shook his hand, firm but not performative. "I'm sorry for the circumstances." He nodded once. He had already heard too many versions of that sentence from people who did not know what they were apologizing for. Irene seemed to understand. She did not add anything soft. She gestured to the chair. Roland remained standing at first. "I need to know exactly where the property stands." "Of course." She opened the file. "The house has not been seized. Not yet, but it is in the final stage before auction transfer. There were several notices sent over the past year. Some were acknowledged, some were returned. After Mr. Everett Hayes passed, the process continued because the account remained unpaid and no legal representative had stepped forward. Because no one told me." Irene's eyes lifted. "We tried the contacts available to us once the estate issue reached town records. Your brother's emergency file was outdated. Your address history was difficult." Roland almost smiled at that. But there was no humor in it. "I moved around, yes." Irene looked back at the file. "The current balance includes back property tax, late penalties, lien processing fees, and notice costs." She turned the paper toward him. Roland read the total and felt his jaw settle. It was not impossible. That made it worse. An impossible number would have freed him. This number sat in the cruel middle ground between ruin and responsibility. It was large enough to damage his life, small enough that refusing it would never feel clean. "How long?" he asked. 10 days before the file moves to auction listing. After that, it becomes harder, though not necessarily impossible, but if you intend to stop the process cleanly, it needs to be settled before then. Roland pulled the chair back and sat down. Neighbors were feeding his dog for 3 months. "You're telling me none of them could pay this before it got here?" Irene's mouth tightened, not in anger, but in recognition of a question she had answered more than once in her own mind. "Some tried. Tried how? A small fund, cash pledges, a few checks, but without the legal heir's signature or an appointed estate representative, they could not settle the account properly. And the balance kept changing as fees were added. I advised them to hold the money until we located the person with authority. Me." "Yes." Roland leaned back. The chair creaked. "So everybody looked at a dying man's house, watched his dog sit out there, and waited for me." "No," Irene said, and for the first time her voice had an edge. "People kept that dog alive. They kept the steps clear. They kept vandals away. They kept heat from failing completely. They called offices that would not call them back. They did what they were allowed to do, and some things they technically were not." She paused, then added more quietly, "But they could not sign your name." Roland looked toward the window. Outside, a plow pushed snow from the curb, the blade throwing a white wave into the street. He wanted to stay angry at Irene because she was in front of him, and paperwork had a face when she held it. He wanted to be angry at the town for letting an old man's debts become public grief. He wanted to be angry at Everett most of all. Everett, who had always known how to stay and make staying look like proof. Everett, who had apparently been too proud to call his own brother and too generous to pay his own bill on time. Everett, who had left behind a dog, a porch light, and a house full of unfinished obligations as if duty could outlive the man who carried it. "What did he spend it on?" Roland asked. Irene lowered her eyes to the folder. "That's not officially part of the tax file." "I'm not asking officially." She hesitated. Then she closed the folder halfway, as if that changed the nature of the conversation. Some of it was medical, a hospital visit after a fall, heart medication, veterinary bills for Bishop, the roof repair after last winter's ice damage, heating oil, and, she stopped, and there were checks to the fuel company under other account numbers, nothing illegal. Just payments made on behalf of other homes. Roland stared at her. "I don't think those people knew," Irene said. "At least not all of them. A laugh left Roland, short and dry. So he saved everybody else from freezing and lost his house. That is one way to make it sound foolish. What would you call it? Irene rested one hand flat on the folder. Lonely people sometimes build systems instead of asking for help. Roland had no answer for that. It came too close to something he did not want named. When he left the municipal office, the air outside seemed sharper than before. He drove back to Harbor Lane slowly, but his mind was not on the road. It kept returning to the number on the paper, then to Caleb's voice, then to the roof deposit in New Hampshire, then to Everett's handwriting in the porch light list. Proud. Won't call. Knock anyway. Roland wondered whether Everett had written that about half the town because it was true or because it was the only language he recognized in himself. The house waited where he had left it, porch light burning under the pale afternoon. Bishop lay beneath the bell, but lifted his head as Roland pulled in. Roland got out and stood by the truck for a long moment, looking at the old dog, the tax notice, the woodpile, the clean path Lydia or Otto had cleared that morning. Anger moved inside him like a tool searching for a bolt and finding nothing it fit. "You could have called," he said toward the closed house, though he did not know whether he meant Everett or himself. Bishop watched him. Roland went inside and began looking, not inspecting this time, but searching. That difference irritated him. Inspecting was useful. Searching was personal. In the laundry room, he found a plastic storage bin stacked with folded blankets, each one clean, each one smelling faintly of cedar and detergent. A strip of masking tape on the lid read, "If net, take." In the cabinet under the hall bench, he found flashlights, batteries organized by size, hand warmers, spare gloves, and a laminated note explaining which radios worked better near the lake. In the back mudroom, there were 3 bags of ice melt, 2 unopened, with names written on them in carpenter's pencil. Lydia steps, Mabel rear door, Voss path. The more he found, the less any of it looked dramatic. There was no grand secret, no hidden room, no evidence that Everett had been anything other than difficult, aging, practical, and quietly overextended. Yet every object seemed to accuse Roland more effectively than a confession would have. A clean blanket, a spare battery, a bag of salt. These were the shapes of care when a man did not know how to say, "I am afraid you will be alone when the cold comes." Bishop followed him slowly. Not eagerly, not like a dog expecting a walk, but with the patience of an old guide crossing familiar rooms. When Roland opened the cabinet beneath the window, Bishop came to stand beside him and touched his nose to a paper sack of dog medication. When Roland moved toward the porch, Bishop stopped under the brass bell and looked up at the cord. When Roland paused at the front window, Bishop leaned against his leg lightly, and Roland saw what the dog had seen for years. Lydia's blue house across the road, her kitchen window facing Everett's porch, the distance between them small enough for a bell, wide enough for pride. Roland pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "Don't do that." Bishop did nothing. "Don't look at me like this" was all obvious. The dog's bent ear twitched. The afternoon was bright enough to make the snow painful. Roland had just pulled Everett's old tool bag from the mudroom when a sound came from the road, a revving engine, a spinning tire, then the hollow whine of a vehicle caught where traction had failed. Bishop lifted his head from the kitchen rug. Roland heard it too, but his first instinct was irritation. Someone had driven too fast on a road that did not forgive haste. Not his problem. Then Bishop rose. It took effort. His stiff hind leg trembled as he pushed himself upright. He did not bark. He crossed the room, went to the front door, and waited. Roland remained by the table. "No," he said, "that isn't our business." Bishop looked back once, not pleading, expecting. Roland hated that look. It belonged to every order he had ever followed before understanding the cost. He opened the door because leaving it closed required more energy than he wanted to spend. Bishop stepped onto the porch and took the bell cord in his teeth. The bell rang once, clear, bright, almost small enough to ignore. Across the road, Lydia's curtain moved. A moment later, her door opened. Otto appeared from the side of his shed with a coat half zipped and his metal flashlight already in hand. Roland stood in Everett's doorway, watching a sequence unfold with the quiet efficiency of a habit older than his arrival. The bell rang. Lydia looked. Otto moved. Mabel's truck slowed near the bend. No one asked who was in charge. No one announced rescue. They simply noticed. The stuck vehicle was a delivery van angled into the snowbank just beyond the lower curve of Harbor Lane. The driver was an older man in a brown coat, embarrassed, cold, and trying very hard to pretend he had not nearly backed into a ditch. Roland followed because Bishop had already limped down the steps and Lydia had crossed the road without waiting for permission. Otto brought a shovel. Mabel produced a bag of sand from the back of her grocery truck, as if she had been waiting all her life to use it on someone else's poor judgment. Roland assessed the van, the wheel depth, the angle of the road. Practical work steadied him. "Stop spinning the tires," he told the driver. "You're digging yourself in. I was trying to rock it out. You were trying to bury it." Otto made a sound that might have been approval. Within 15 minutes, Roland had the tow chain from his truck hooked properly, sand under the wheels, Otto clearing the packed snow behind the tires, Lydia guiding from the side where the driver could see her bright scarf. Bishop stood near the mailbox, not useful in any mechanical sense, but alert, eyes moving from person to person as if making sure the pattern held. When the van came free, the driver nearly cried from relief and embarrassment. He tried to thank everyone at once. Lydia handed him coffee from a thermos. Otto told him to learn what low gear was for. Mabel added that if he delivered bread late again, she would blame his mother. Roland unhooked the chain and coiled it back into his truck bed. His gloves were wet, his boots were packed with snow at the seams. It was ordinary. That was what unsettled him. No one had been dying, no one had needed a hero. A man had been cold, stuck, proud, and minutes away from making the situation worse. A bell had rung, and the road had answered. He looked back at Everett's house. The porch light glowed in daylight, unnecessary and steady. Bishop had already turned toward it, limping slowly, satisfied not because he had saved someone, but because the world had moved the way it was supposed to move. Something in Roland gave slightly, not enough to be called change, but enough to hurt. That evening, he spread the tax papers across Everett's kitchen table. Beside them lay the notebook, the funeral envelope from Vermont, and the garage estimate Caleb had sent 2 weeks earlier. Roland wrote numbers on a blank sheet. Back taxes, penalties, lien fees, roof deposit in New Hampshire, rent due on the garage, fuel, food, Bishop's medication. The pencil moved in hard strokes, each total closing a door somewhere. Caleb called after dark. Roland let it ring until the last moment, then answered. "I talked to the landlord," Caleb said without greeting. "He'll give us until Friday for the roof deposit. After that he lists the bay. I can't cover your half. I know." "No, I don't think you do. We lose that front bay, we lose the plow contracts. We lose the plow contracts. We're back to oil changes and favors." Roland looked through the kitchen window. Bishop was outside beneath the porch light again, lying in the sheltered place, head turned toward the road. Snow had begun falling, fine and silver in the glow. "I found the tax total," Roland said. Caleb was silent a beat. "How bad?" Roland told him. A low whistle came through the phone. "That's your roof money." "Yes, Roland. I know. Do not tell me you're thinking about paying it." Roland closed his eyes. On the table, Everett's notebook lay open to a page where his brother had written, "Light on if weather drops below 10. Check Lydia even if she says not to. Bishop knows Bell." "I'm not thinking clearly enough to tell you anything," Roland said. "That house is not your life." Roland opened his eyes. Outside, Bishop lifted his head as a distant truck passed somewhere beyond the bend. For a second, the old dog's whole body gathered around Hope, then settled again when the sound faded. Roland felt the movement like a hand closing around his throat. "No," he said quietly, but it might have been his. Caleb swore under his breath, not angrily enough to hide concern. "You've got 10 days, right? Less if I want it clean. Then come back tomorrow. We'll figure it out from here. Don't sit in a dead man's kitchen letting guilt make financial decisions." Roland looked at the bills, the notebook, the old dog in the snow, and the porch light burning over all of it. For most of his life, he had known how to leave before a place could ask too much from him. This time, the door was open. Behind him, the road was clear enough, and the old habit weighted like a coat he could put on again. But Bishop was lying outside in the cold, beneath a light Everett had kept burning for everyone, except the brother he had not known how to call home. Roland did not answer Caleb. He only sat there as the snow thickened beyond the window. understanding with a slow and unwanted certainty that he could still save the life he had planned, or he could keep the promise Everett had left behind. He could not do both. Roland Hayes stayed because of the house, or that was what he told everyone who asked. He said he needed a few more days to assess the property before making a legal decision. He said the weather made travel unpredictable. He said the paperwork still needed review. All of those statements were true enough to be useful and incomplete enough to be dishonest. The real reason was harder to say because it had no clean edge. It was in the tax total lying on Everett's kitchen table. It was in the porch light list, in the old dog watching him from beneath the porch beam, in the way Harbor Lane seemed to keep moving around Everett's absence as if the man had left behind a rhythm no one knew how to stop. Roland had spent most of his adult life trusting movement. Bases, jobs, rentals, garages, temporary rooms with one duffel near the door. Staying always looked dangerous to him because staying gave the past time to find you. Yet now he woke in his brother's house before sunrise, fed the stove, made coffee he did not particularly like, checked Bishop's water, and told himself none of it meant anything permanent. On the third morning after the stuck delivery van, Roland opened the porch light list again and stopped pretending he was only reading. Everett's notes were not organized for sentiment, they were organized by weather and failure. Graham Voss, heater intake, wood low, lungs bad, won't ask. Mabel, rear step ice, wrist bad, pretends fine. Otto, shed roof, left knee, won't let anyone on ladder. Lydia, check bell response, hates being fussed over more than she admits. Roland stood over the notebook with one hand braced on the table and felt the old irritation rise. Everett had made a whole manual out of other people's stubbornness while never writing a single line about his own. Then Roland looked at Bishop, who had lifted his head from the kitchen rug and was watching him with tired expectation, and the irritation lost its shape. "You're not coming far," Roland said. Bishop's ears shifted. "I mean it. Short route. No hero business." The old German shepherd pushed himself up slowly, stiff hind leg trembling before it accepted weight. He did not rush the door. He waited while Roland packed a canvas bag with a flashlight, pliers, a roll of tape, a small wrench set, 2 hand warmers, and a bottle of water for the dog. Bishop did not like being fussed over, but he tolerated the water because Roland placed it in the bag without ceremony. Outside, the morning was bright enough to make the whole town look carved from glass. Snow glittered on the road banks. Lake Marrow lay white and silent beyond the houses. The air bit at Roland's cheeks as he stepped off the porch, but Bishop paused at the bottom step and turned his head back toward the house. The porch light was off now in daylight, but the brass bell hung still, and the plastic tax notice on the door fluttered faintly in the breeze. Bishop would leave the yard only in a certain way. Roland learned it within the first 30 feet. The dog did not pull ahead like an animal eager for freedom. He moved within the invisible boundaries of memory, stopping at the gate, looking back once, then continuing only when Roland waited. If Roland angled too far toward the truck, Bishop stiffened. If Roland followed the narrow walking path that curved between Harbor Lane and the lower houses, Bishop relaxed. He was not willing to be taken away. He was willing to walk where Everett had walked. Graham Voss lived 2 houses down and one long bend toward the lake, in a gray cabin with a slanted roof and a porch crowded by firewood that looked better from the road than it did up close. The chimney smoked, but thinly. Inside, something rattled behind the wall with the tired rhythm of a machine trying to die politely. Graham opened the door after the 3rd knock, not the 1st or 2nd, as if answering too quickly would admit he had been waiting. He was tall and narrow, with a white beard like rough wool, watery blue eyes, and hands swollen at the knuckles from a lifetime of boat frames, rope, and cold tools. He wore a flannel shirt under a stretched gray cardigan and looked at Roland as if he had already found him disappointing. "You're Everett's brother," Graham said. "Roland Hayes, I heard." Bishop stepped forward and placed his silver muzzle against Graham's knee. The old man's face changed so quickly Roland almost missed it. The sarcasm fell away first, then the hard mouth. Graham looked down at the dog, and for a second he seemed not old, but simply left behind. "You shouldn't be out here," Graham muttered to Bishop. The dog leaned a little more weight against him. Graham cleared his throat and stepped back. Well, come in before you let my heat out and blame the house. The cabin smelled of coffee, dust, old wood, and metal warmed too many times. Roland heard the heater rattle before he saw it, a low clacking near the baseboard. Graham pretended not to notice Roland noticing. Things always done that. Everett wrote down heater intake. Everett wrote down everybody's business. He fix it, he hit it first. Did that work? Sometimes. Roland knelt by the heater, removed the front panel, and saw the problem quickly enough. Dust packed along the intake, a loose bracket vibrating against the casing, airflow restricted enough to make the unit work harder than it should. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would explode in the next minute. Just the kind of small neglect that turned dangerous after 2 cold nights and one old man too proud to call. Graham stood over him, pretending to supervise. Your brother used to say that heater sounded like a mule trapped in a barrel. He was wrong, Roland said, tightening the bracket. It sounds like a bolt in a coffee can. Graham made a rough sound that might have been a laugh before age and grief damaged it. Bishop lay near the door, eyes half closed, but his body remained angled toward the road, as if part of him still guarded Everett's route. When Roland finished, the heater settled into a steady hum. Graham did not thank him. Instead, he opened a wood box by the stove and frowned at the low stack inside, as if the empty space had betrayed him. I have more outside, he said.
Under the tarp that froze to the ground?
Graham looked at him. Roland zipped his jacket. I'll bring some in. I didn't ask. I know. The words hung between them. They sounded like Everett. Roland heard it and hated that he had not meant to imitate him. He brought in enough wood for 2 days, stacking it beside the stove, while Graham complained about the arrangement. When Roland and Bishop left, Graham stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, his eyes fixed on the dog. Everett was a rude man, Graham said. So people keep telling me. Good rude, Graham added. There's a difference. Roland carried that sentence with him down the road. Mabel Crane's grocery sat closer to the center of town, a squat building with green trim and windows, crowded by hand-lettered signs advertising eggs, coffee, boot socks, and salt. A bell over the door gave a dull jangle when Roland entered. Mabel looked up from behind the counter, where she was trying to open a jar with her left hand, while her right wrist, wrapped in cloth, rested uselessly against her apron. She wore a pine green sweater and a brown canvas apron, dusted with flour and sugar from the bakery shelf she swore was not a bakery shelf. Her silver curls sprang from under a knitted cap, and her expression sharpened the moment she saw Roland noticing the jar. If you offer to help, I'll charge you double for whatever you came in to buy, she said. I didn't come to buy. That's worse. Bishop waited just inside the door, snow melting from his paws onto the mat. Mabel looked at him, and the performance of annoyance faltered. Porch boy, she whispered. Bishop took 2 slow steps forward. He did not place his muzzle on her knee as he had with Graham. He simply stood near the counter, looking up at her with the patient recognition of a creature who remembered every person Everett had worried over. Mabel turned away too quickly and pretended to rearrange a stack of canned peaches. Everett used to come in here and tell me my rear step was a lawsuit waiting to happen, she said. Then he'd throw salt on it himself like I had personally offended him. Roland glanced toward the back hallway. Is it icy now? It's Maine in February. Of course it's icy. Your wrist, it's attached. That wasn't the question. Mabel's eyes narrowed. You talk like him when you don't want to feel something. Roland almost answered, but the words stopped at the back of his throat. Instead, he went out the rear door and found exactly what Everett's notebook had promised. A narrow step glazed beneath fresh powder, the kind of ice that looked harmless until someone's feet left the world. He spread salt, cleared the drift against the lower frame, and fixed the door catch so it would not stick if she had to come in with both hands full. When he returned, Mabel had placed a small paper bag on the counter. For Bishop, she said. He has food, not this. Inside were soft strips of cooked chicken wrapped in wax paper. Bishop's nose lifted slightly. Roland took the bag. Mabel did not look at him when she spoke again. Everett once told me if I kept trying to be heroic with a wrist swollen like a loaf of bread, he'd nail my back door shut and make me use the front like civilized people. Her mouth trembled, irritated by its own grief. I told him he had the manners of a barn shovel. What did he say? He said a barn shovel was useful. Roland looked down at Bishop. The dog's eyes were on Mabel, and for once were not fixed on the road, the house, or the past. They were simply present with someone who missed the same difficult man. By late afternoon, the short route had become longer than Roland intended. Otto's boat shed came last because Roland had been avoiding it. He did not want to climb another roof, did not want to hear another story about Everett wrapped in insults, did not want to become part of a town's habit simply because he had tools. Otto was outside when Roland arrived, standing below the shed with a ladder already leaning against the wall and an expression that dared anyone to comment. His green canvas coat was half-zipped, his white beard caught bits of snow, and his left knee was wrapped beneath his work pants in a brace he clearly hoped no one noticed. "You're not going up there," Roland said. Otto looked offended. "I've been climbing roofs since before you were born. That explains the knee. That knee has done more honest work than most men. It can do honest work on the ground." Bishop lowered himself beside a coil of rope and watched them both. Otto looked at the dog, then at the roof, then back at Roland. "Everett sent you?" "No. Looks like he did." Roland climbed the ladder before he could answer. The repair was small, a loose metal sheet, a split seam letting water into the corner over Otto's workbench. He fixed it while Otto criticized from below with unnecessary detail. But when Roland came down, Otto handed him a dented metal thermos. "Coffee. I have coffee." "This one's hot." Roland accepted it. That was the first thing that felt like defeat and not loss. They returned to Everett's house as the light began to turn blue. Bishop was tired by then. Twice he stopped, not refusing to go on, but negotiating with his own body. Roland waited each time, close enough to lift him if necessary, far enough not to insult him. At the gate, Bishop paused longer than before. He looked up at the porch, at the brass bell, at the front window where Everett had once watched weather gather over the lake. Then he stepped inside the yard.
"You always check back,"
Roland said quietly. Bishop's tail moved once, low and slow. Lydia was standing at her own window when Roland looked across the road. She drew the curtain halfway, then stopped pretending she had not been watching. A minute later she came over with a covered dish she did not mention. In the kitchen, while Bishop drank water and lay down with a long sigh, Lydia stood near the table and looked at the porch light list lying open. "I keep thinking if the bell stops," she said, "then he's really gone." Roland did not ask who she meant. Everett or Bishop, maybe both. Lydia rubbed her thumb along the edge of the dish towel in her hands. "I tell myself I'm caring for the dog. That sounds respectable. But some mornings I think I'm just trying to keep Everett from disappearing all at once." Roland looked toward the hallway, where Everett's work coat hung in shadow. "He disappeared from me a long time before he died. That doesn't mean he stopped leaving a light on." The sentence was too gentle to defend against. Roland turned away first. That night, after Lydia left and Bishop settled near the stove, Roland finally opened Everett's bedroom. The room was colder than the rest of the house, neat in the exact way that made absence feel intentional. A narrow bed, a dresser, work socks folded in pairs, a framed photograph turned face down on the nightstand. Roland did not touch the photograph at first. He checked the closet, the lower drawer, then the space beneath the bed because he was still pretending to search for documents. His hand found a flat metal box. It was old, army green, the paint scratched at the corners. Inside were letters tied in two uneven bundles with faded twine. Roland recognized his own handwriting before his mind accepted it. APO addresses, training locations, short notes from years when he had written home out of obligation, anger, loneliness, or habit, never knowing whether Everett read them. Some envelopes were unopened at the top but slit carefully along the side, Everett style. Avoid damage. Preserve function. On several envelopes, in pencil, Everett had written notes so small Roland had to hold them near the lamp. "He's alive. Good. Still angry. Still writing. Says cold there is worse. Doubt it. If he ever comes back, fix porch rail before he trips and blames me." Roland sat on the edge of the bed. The metal box rested on his knees. There was no apology inside. No hidden money, no explanation that would make 19 years simple. Only proof that Everett had kept every letter, even the bitter ones. Proof that silence had not been absence. proof that the brother Roland had accused of judging him had been following his life from a distance with the same rough, useless tenderness he gave everyone else. In the doorway, Bishop stood watching. Roland's throat tightened. He looked down at the envelope in his hand, at the pencil words left by a man who had not known how to ask anyone to stay. He kept them, Roland said, though no one in the room needed to be told. Bishop came forward, slow and quiet, and rested his muzzle against Roland's knee. Roland did not move for a long time. Later, when the house had gone dark except for the stove and the porch light beyond the window, Roland set Bishop's bowl down in the kitchen. Soft food, warm water, the chicken Mabel had wrapped in wax paper, and the medication Helen had told him not to forget. He expected the old dog to sniff, take a mouthful, then turn away as he had done every night since Roland arrived. Bishop lowered his head. He ate slowly, carefully, all of it. Roland stood by the counter with one hand on the old military watch at his wrist, listening to the quiet scrape of the bowl against the floor. It should not have felt like forgiveness. It was only a dog eating dinner. But in Everett's kitchen, beneath the roof that might still be lost, after a day of seeing how many people did not know how to ask for help, it felt like the first small sign that something in the house had decided not to die yet. The deadline morning came beautiful enough to feel unfair. Brightwater Ridge woke beneath a pale blue sky, the kind of winter sky so clear it seemed the cold had polished it during the night. Snow had fallen after midnight and stopped before dawn, leaving every roof, fence rail, mailbox, and pine branch carrying a clean white edge. Lake Merrow lay frozen under the sun, flat and blinding, with faint blue shadows where the wind had pushed loose powder across the ice. Harbor Lane looked almost gentle. Nothing in the brightness suggested liens, penalties, auction transfer, old grief, or the kind of decision that could empty one future to preserve the remains of another. Roland Hayes stood in Everett's kitchen before sunrise with 3 envelopes on the table. One held the final tax balance from Irene Bell's office. One held the garage estimate Caleb had sent from New Hampshire. The third was plain, unmarked, and thick with cash from the savings. Roland had withdrawn the day before after sitting in the bank parking lot for 23 minutes with the heater running and his hands unmoving on the wheel. He had not counted the money that morning. He had counted it 3 times already. Counting again would not change what it meant. Bishop lay on the rug near the stove, awake but still, his old amber eyes following Roland without demand. That seemed worse than begging. The dog had eaten all his food the night before, and the empty bowl sat washed and turned upside down beside the sink, a small domestic fact that made the room feel less abandoned than it had a week earlier. Roland had refilled the wood box before bed. He had checked Bishop's medication. He had fixed the loose porch rail at 2 a.m. because sleep had not come and because Everett's pencil note would not leave him alone. If he ever comes back, fix porch rail before he trips and blames me. Roland picked up the plain envelope, then set it down again. He looked toward the hallway where Everett's brown work coat hung in the shadow by the door. For 19 years, leaving had been the one skill he trusted. He had left arguments, bases, towns, bad jobs, women who asked careful questions, apartments that began to smell too much like home. Leaving had kept him moving. Moving had kept him from noticing how many places never called after him. Yet the envelope on the table did not feel like staying in any simple way. It felt like stepping into a debt that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with answering a knock that had been sounding for decades. "You understand this is stupid," he said to Bishop. The old dog's right ear twitched, the bent tip catching the stove light. I could still drive out. Bishop rested his chin on his paws. Roland almost smiled. That's not an argument. But it was, in Bishop's way. The dog had no interest in explaining duty, no talent for shame, no use for the kind of speeches men made when they wanted their fear to look principled. Bishop only remained. Sometimes presence was the hardest answer to dismiss. The municipal office opened at 8:30. Roland arrived at 8:24 and waited outside in the truck, watching Irene Bell unlock the front door and pause when she saw him. She did not wave. That would have been too easy. She only held the door open a moment longer than necessary, giving him the choice to come in or drive away without witness. He went in. The office seemed quieter than before. The old coffee smell remained. A radiator clicked along the wall. Somewhere in the back, a printer made a dull mechanical sound as if ordinary government business had no idea that one man's life was being divided on a desk. Irene wore the same burgundy cardigan, her silver hair tucked neatly behind both ears. When Roland placed the envelope on her desk, she looked at it, then at him, and did not touch it right away. "Are you sure?" she asked. "No." The honesty seemed to surprise them both. Irene's hand softened on the edge of the folder. "That may be the most responsible answer I've heard all winter. I'm paying it, all of it. Tax, penalties, lien fees, whatever stops the auction clean." Irene sat back slowly. "Mr. Hayes, Roland, once I process this, the property remains in the estate pending your next steps. It does not solve everything. Insurance, utilities, maintenance, probate questions. I know. It also does not require you to live there. I know that too." Her eyes held on his face a little longer. Then she nodded, the motion small and official, but not cold. She opened the envelope, counted the payment with careful hands, printed receipts, stamped forms, and made him sign in 3 places. Roland watched the blue ink settle into paper. It should have felt anticlimactic. A few signatures, a receipt, a stamp pressed down with a dull thud, no trumpet, no forgiveness, no visible shift in the world. Yet when Irene slid the final copy across the desk, the weight in Roland's chest changed. It did not leave. It settled lower, becoming something he would have to carry on purpose. "The auction file is stopped," Irene said. Roland looked at the receipt. "That's it? For this part?" He gave a short nod, folded the paper, and placed it inside his jacket. Irene closed the folder and rested her palm on top of it, the same gesture she had used when giving bad news. This time, her voice was quieter. Everett would have argued with the penalties. Everett argued with weather. He would have argued with those too. Roland stood. He should have paid before it came to this. Yes, Irene said. He should have. The simple agreement hit harder than defense would have. Irene did not make Everett noble. She did not make him foolish. She left him human, and that gave Roland nothing clean to fight. When he returned to Harbor Lane, nothing looked different. The porch still leaned. The snow still glittered. The brass bell still hung beneath the beam. Bishop lifted his head when the truck came up the road, but he did not rise until Roland stepped out. Then the old dog pushed himself to his feet and came down 2 steps, slow but determined. Roland stood at the gate with the receipt in his hand. "It's done," he said. Bishop sniffed the paper, then looked past him toward the road. "Yeah," Roland said. "I know, not the part you were waiting for." News moved through Harbor Lane without anyone announcing it. Irene must have called Lydia, or Lydia must have seen Roland's truck return too soon for bad news, or perhaps towns simply had veins for this kind of thing. By noon, Lydia crossed the road carrying a cloth-wrapped loaf of bread, still warm enough to fog the air above it. She did not hug Roland, which he appreciated. She set the bread on the kitchen counter and said, "I made too much. You live alone. I know how much I made." Otto came next with 2 heavy brass hinges tucked under one arm. "For the shed door," he said, as if Roland had requested them. "Old ones are trash. Everything around here is apparently almost trash. That's how you know it's worth fixing." Mabel arrived in her plum coat with a box of canned goods, coffee, and a bag of Bishop's soft food. She placed them on the table, looked at Roland's face, and wisely decided not to speak for 3 full seconds. It was the closest she came to tenderness. "You'll need shelves if you're going to keep supplies." Everett's pantry system was an insult to civilization. "I haven't said I'm keeping supplies." Mabel glanced at Bishop. "Of course not." Graham Voss came last, moving slowly up the path with a bundle of dry cedar tucked awkwardly against his chest. His bad lungs made him breathe through his nose in short, stubborn pulls. Roland stepped forward to take the wood. Graham jerked it away. "I can carry a damn bundle. You're wheezing." "I wheeze recreationally." Roland let him reach the porch before taking half the load without asking. Graham glared but did not fight him. When the wood was stacked beside the door, the old man stood there, eyes on the porch light, though it was not yet lit. "Your brother would call you an idiot," Graham said. "For paying? For paying penalties without making the clerk feel bad." Roland looked at him. Graham's mouth shifted, almost as to smile. He'd be pleased after, but he'd take the long way to it. Nobody celebrated. No one brought balloons or speeches. The offerings remained practical: bread, hinges, canned goods, cedar, quiet presents. Their restraint nearly undid Roland. Praise he could have rejected, gratitude he could have minimized. But this wordless supply line, each person bringing what the house might need, left him standing in the kitchen with too many things to say and no language he trusted. By evening, the house smelled of bread, cedar, coffee, and dog food warming near the stove. The people had gone home one by one. Lydia took the empty dish. Otto measured the shed door and left pencil marks on the frame. Mabel rearranged the pantry without permission. Graham sat for exactly 7 minutes in Everett's old chair, said it was uncomfortable, and left before anyone could hear his voice change. Bishop watched them all from the kitchen rug, tired but alert, as if counting the road returning to itself. After dark, Roland went into Everett's bedroom. He had not intended to. The day had been long, and the decision had left him with the strange hollow exhaustion that comes after a wound is cleaned but not healed. Yet the metal box under the bed had been in his mind since the night before. He sat on the narrow bed, opened it again, and lifted the bundles of letters. At the bottom, beneath the letters he had sent from bases and training grounds and rented rooms, lay one envelope he had not noticed before. It was not addressed. It had never been mailed. Everett had written Roland on the front and nothing else. Roland held it for a long time before opening it. The paper inside was folded once. Everett's handwriting filled less than half the page, blunt and slanted, the pencil pressure heavy in some places and faint in others. Roland, I do not know how to call you back. I do not know what I would say if you came. Probably the wrong thing first. Maybe the wrong thing second, too. That is how our family does tenderness, I guess. We make it limp before it reaches the door. If you ever stand on this porch again, turn the light on. Somebody out here always needs to see one burning. Maybe that is all a house is good for in winter. Maybe it is all a man is good for, too. Everett Roland read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower, because the words refused to become easier. There was no apology in the shape he had spent years imagining. No confession that Everett had been wrong and Roland right. No dramatic plea for reconciliation. It was clumsy, practical, and almost unbearably Everett. I do not know how to call you back. That line did more damage than if his brother had written, I miss you. It admitted failure without knowing how to kneel. Roland bent forward, the letter in both hands. For a moment his breathing sounded too loud in the small room. He did not sob. Nothing in him knew how to do that cleanly. But something old and rigid loosened with such pain that he pressed one fist against his mouth and closed his eyes. He saw their mother's kitchen. Everett at the sink, tired. Roland younger, angry, certain leaving made him brave. He heard his own voice saying things that could not be unsaid, and Everett answering with silence sharp enough to cut both of them. 19 years. A whole life built from two men waiting for the other to learn a language neither had been taught. A soft scrape came from the hallway. Bishop stood in the doorway with the bell cord in his mouth. It was not the full cord from the porch. Only the short replacement loop Otto had left on a hook after rehanging it weeks ago. Bishop must have found it where it had fallen near the mudroom bench. He carried it carefully, as if it were not rope but message. His old body swayed slightly with fatigue. He crossed the room and dropped the cord at Roland's feet. Roland looked from the dog to the letter. Subtle, he whispered, though his voice broke on the word. Bishop lowered himself to the floor with a long breath, chin near the cord. Roland sat there until the cold from the bedroom crept through his sleeves. Then he stood, carried the cord, the letter, and Everett's old carpenter pencil out to the porch. The night was clear, hard, and full of stars. Snow reflected the porch light in a soft yellow circle. Across the road, Lydia's window glowed. Farther down Harbor Lane, a few small lamps burned behind curtains. The town was not watching. That helped. Roland rehung the bell cord properly, testing the knot twice. Then he took a scrap of flat wood from the porch rail repair pile, braced it on the step, and wrote in large block letters with Everett's pencil. Light on means knock. The words looked rough, uneven, human. He fixed the sign beneath the porch light using 2 screws from his pocket. When he stepped back, the light fell over it, plain and steady. Bishop had followed him as far as the doorway. The old dog stood with his paws on the threshold, looking at the sign, then at Roland, then out toward the road. "It isn't pretty," Roland said. Bishop's tail moved once. "Fine, it's functional." That seemed to satisfy them both. Later, with the stove warm and the sign hanging outside, Roland called Caleb. He did not put the call on speaker. He stood by the kitchen window, looking out at Bishop lying under the porch light in the sheltered place he refused to surrender. Caleb answered on the second ring. "Tell me you're on your way back tomorrow." "I'm not." Silence. "Roland, I paid the tax." The silence changed temperature. "You did what?" "I stopped the auction." "You used the roof money?" "Yes." Caleb swore, not loudly, which made it worse. "Do you understand what that does to the garage?" "Yes." "No, I don't think you do. I think you're standing in some dead brother's house letting grief talk like duty." Roland closed his eyes, then opened them. "Maybe, but I'm staying for a while." "For what? A house? A dog? A town that managed to survive before you showed up?" Roland looked at Bishop. Snow had begun to fall again, lightly now, drifting through the porch, light like ash made gentle. The old dog's muzzle rested on his paws, but his eyes remained open, watching the road without the sharp desperation Roland had seen before. Not healed, not finished, but less alone. Caleb's voice came again, lower. "What is there worth losing everything for?" Roland watched the light touch the new sign under the porch beam. "Light on means knock." Everett's words, almost. Roland's hand rested over the folded letter in his pocket. "No," he said quietly. "Not everything." "What?" Roland swallowed. "There's something here I can't lose again." Caleb did not answer. For once, the silence between them did not feel empty. It felt like a man on the other end of the line, understanding anger, would not move what had already been chosen. Roland ended the call gently. Outside, the bell cord hung still beneath the porch roof. The light burned over the sign. Bishop breathed slowly in the snow-shadowed glow, guarding nothing now except the first fragile hour after a decision. Roland stood in Everett's kitchen, with less money than he had yesterday, fewer plans than he had last week, and a strange, aching sense that for the first time in years he had not left when leaving would have been easier. Winter did not loosen its hold on Brightwater Ridge, simply because Roland Hayes had paid the tax bill. Snow still came in slow white curtains across Lake Marrow. The road still froze in the shaded bend below Harbor Lane. Wind still moved hard through the pines at night, rattling loose branches and pressing cold fingers against every old window frame in Everett's house. Nothing about the weather became gentler, but the house changed. Not all at once, not in the way people like to imagine when they need proof that a decision was right. It changed in repairs, in routines, in objects placed where hands could find them in the dark. The kitchen stove was lit before sunrise now. The woodbox stayed full, the loose porch rail no longer shifted under weight. Otto's new hinges held the shed door square against the wind. Mabel's canned goods sat on newly cleared shelves beside coffee, batteries, matches, hand warmers, and soup. The blankets in the laundry room had been washed again, folded tighter, and stacked in a bin. Roland relabeled with a black marker, "Take one if you need it." He stood staring at the words afterward, irritated by how much they looked like something Everett might have written, and then added beneath them, "Bring it back or don't. Just stay warm." He did not try to become Everett. That mattered more than anyone said. Roland did not scold the town in Everett's voice, did not perform the same gruff jokes, did not slam tools down just to make kindness sound like inconvenience. He had his own way of being difficult. He made lists that were cleaner than Everett's, maps that were easier to read, and schedules that left less to memory. He called Irene Bell at the municipal office and asked for a list of houses most likely to lose access during heavy snow, then pretended not to hear the relief in her voice. He asked Dr. Helen Ashford for extra copies of Bishop's medication instructions and taped one inside the kitchen cabinet. He let Lydia keep a spare key under a blue ceramic bird near her back step, though he told her it was a terrible hiding place, and she told him everyone already knew men loved insulting things they secretly approved of. He helped Otto hang a rack in the shed for shovels, tow chains, and sandbags. Mabel donated 3 crates and then rearranged the pantry twice because, in her words, your brother stored things like he expected raccoons to read labels. The work that had once belonged to Everett alone began to spread quietly. No meeting was held. Nobody named it a committee. That would have killed it. Harbor Lane simply adjusted, as small winter places do when survival becomes more practical than pride. Lydia watched the windows across the road, but now Roland watched hers too. Otto checked the lower curve near the dock road when wind pushed snow into the bend. Mabel kept salt near the grocery's rear door and left an extra bag on her step for anyone whose path iced over. Graham Voss, who still claimed community effort was a symptom of boredom, kept his porch light on until he saw Roland's truck pass on bad evenings. Irene called if the town office heard about a power outage on the lakeside. Dr. Helen combined her animal visits with quiet welfare checks, carrying dog medication, arthritis advice, and the kind of firm look that made old men admit they had not eaten since morning. Through all of it, Bishop remained the center of the house and the measure of its healing. He was weaker now. There was no use pretending otherwise. Some mornings he rose with determination and made it to the porch steps before his stiff hind leg began to tremble. Other mornings he stayed on the rug near the stove, eyes open, ears following sounds from the road while his body refused the old duty. Roland learned the difference between helping and insulting him. Dr. Helen had been clear. "Let him take the steps he can still take," she said while showing Roland how to warm the muscles above Bishop's hip. "Do not carry him because watching him try hurts you. Carry him when trying hurts him." Roland had not liked being understood so efficiently. He followed the instruction anyway, so Bishop chose. That became the rule. If he rose and made for the door, Roland opened it. If he stopped halfway, Roland waited. If Bishop looked back at the stove instead of the porch, Roland said, "Your call, old man," and let him turn around without making the moment into tragedy. The dog still looked down the road. That did not change. When a truck slowed near the bend, Bishop's ears lifted. When tires crunched over packed snow, his head rose. When an ambulance passed on the county road one afternoon, distant and muffled by wind, Bishop stood so suddenly that his back legs nearly failed him. Roland caught himself reaching too fast, stopped, and let the dog steady on his own. Bishop listened until the sound faded. Then he lowered himself again, not defeated, but tired in a way that had room for something besides waiting. Roland began to understand that grief did not leave a place because a decision had been made. It rearranged itself around the living. Everett was still everywhere. In the pencil marks on the shed shelf, in the old coat by the door, in the bell cord under the porch beam, in the way Lydia looked at the house in the morning before looking at the weather. But Everett's absence no longer sat in the rooms like a locked door. It had become part of the work, part of the heat, part of the reason the light stayed on. One evening in late February, the sky dimmed early behind a veil of soft snow. It was not a dangerous storm, only steady and quiet, the kind that made the town look gentler than it was. Roland had returned from Graham's with an empty thermos and a complaint about the man's heater that sounded suspiciously like affection. Bishop had waited inside that day, too sore for the walk, though Roland found him at the front window when he came back, watching the road from behind the glass. "You supervised from a distance," Roland said, hanging his jacket by the door. Bishop gave a low breath through his nose, which Roland had learned to interpret as disagreement, judgment, or both. By nightfall, the house was warm. The stove clicked softly as the wood settled. The kitchen smelled of cedar, coffee, and the chicken Mabel had sent for Bishop wrapped in wax paper. Roland cleared the table, checked the battery lanterns, refilled the water bowl, and stood near the front door listening to the weather. Snow brushed against the porch. No wind, no engine trouble from the road, no calls from Irene, no flicker in the lights from Lydia's house. For once, Harbor Lane seemed to need nothing from him. He reached for the porch light switch. His hand paused on it. For years, Everett had turned that light on when weather turned bad, when someone might need shelter, when the road became uncertain. Roland had kept it on every night since paying the tax, partly out of respect, and partly because turning it off felt like testing a wound with a thumb. But tonight the snow was harmless, the sky was calm. The road had been plowed, nobody was coming. The practical part of him, the part that still counted electricity and made repairs by priority, said there was no reason to leave it burning. He switched it off. The porch disappeared into blue darkness. The silence that followed was immediate and wrong. Roland stood there, fingers still near the switch, surprised by the force of it. The house did not creak. Bishop did not bark. No bell rang. Yet the dark outside the front window felt like a door closed in someone's face. He told himself he was being sentimental, which irritated him enough to turn toward the stove. Then he heard Bishop move. It was a slow sound, nails against floorboards, a shift of old weight, the small strained breath Bishop made when his hip protested. Roland turned. The German shepherd had pushed himself up from the rug. His head was low, his silver muzzle pointed toward the door. He took one step, then another, each one deliberate. Roland started to speak, but the dog came to him before he could. Bishop reached Roland's side, lifted his muzzle, and caught the cuff of the olive drab sleeve gently between his teeth. He did not pull hard. He did not need to. Roland looked down at him, and the whole story of the house seemed to gather in that small pressure of teeth on fabric. Everett on the kitchen floor telling Bishop, Bell. Lydia crossing through storm, 3 months of waiting, the tax notice, the notebook, Graham's heater, Mabel's wrist, Otto's roof, the letter that said, "If you ever stand on this porch again, turn the light on. Somebody out here always needs to see one burning." Roland's throat tightened. "You're right," he said. Bishop released the sleeve. Roland turned the porch light back on. Gold spilled across the steps, the rail, the new sign beneath the beam. Light on means knock. Snowflakes moved through the glow like slow sparks. The brass bell caught one thin line of light along its rim. Across the road, Lydia's window remained warm and steady behind her curtains. The world outside had not changed, but the dark had been answered. Roland opened the door. Cold air slid into the hall, clean and soft. Bishop stepped onto the threshold. For a second, Roland thought the dog would go to his usual place beneath the porch beam, lower his body into the sheltered corner, and face the road as he had done for months. Bishop did move forward, but only to the edge of the porch. He stood there beneath the light, old body framed in gold, snow gathering lightly along his back, his ears lifted toward the bend where the ambulance had vanished, the right one still bent at the tip. His black saddle, golden chest, and silver muzzle glowed against the white night. He looked at the road for a long time. Roland did not rush him. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and let the cold enter the house, because some moments deserved the door left open. Bishop's breathing was audible, slow and rough. The bell moved once in a faint breeze and gave an eagle clear note. It was not loud. It did not call anyone. It simply sounded, then faded. Bishop did not lie down. Instead, after all those months, after every morning of waiting and every evening of listening, he turned. At first, Roland did not understand what he was seeing. Bishop took one step back toward the door, then another. He crossed the threshold into the house by choice, not because he had been called, coaxed, lifted, or pulled. He did not look ashamed of leaving the porch. He did not look healed. He looked tired, old, and certain in the way dogs can be certain when humans are still searching for language. The duty had not vanished. It had moved. Roland stood very still as Bishop walked past him. The dog crossed the entry, past Everett's old work coat, and went into the kitchen. He circled once on the worn rug near the stove, the same rug where Everett had warmed him after icy walks and where Roland had placed his food bowl every night since arriving. Then Bishop lowered himself with a deep, careful sigh and rested his head on Roland's boot when Roland came to stand beside him. The weight of that old silver muzzle nearly broke him. Roland lowered himself to the floor. His knees complained, but he ignored them. He placed one hand on Bishop's neck, feeling the warmth under the thick fur, the fragile beat of life beneath age, grief, and loyalty. Bishop's eyes remained open, watching him without urgency. "You didn't forget him," Roland whispered. Bishop's eyes softened. "I know." Roland swallowed hard. "I know you didn't." Outside, the light continued to burn. The road lay quiet under falling snow. The sign beneath the porch beam held steady, rough letters dark against pale wood. Roland looked toward the hallway, toward the coat, toward the rooms Everett had left mid-breath, and spoke so softly the words seemed meant for the living and the dead at once. "You don't have to hold it alone anymore," he said. "He doesn't either." His hand moved over Bishop's silvered muzzle. "I'm here." The house did not answer. That was all right. For once, Roland did not need a response. Bishop closed his eyes halfway, not in collapse, not in surrender, but in rest. True rest, the kind that comes only when the body believes the door is guarded, the fire is lit, and the one who was supposed to return has, in some unfinished human way, sent someone else. Morning came clear and blue after the quiet snow. Lydia Bramwell pulled her kitchen curtain at 7, expecting to see what she had seen for months. The porch light, the sheltered corner, Bishop lying beneath it with his face toward the road. Instead, she saw the light still burning, smoke rising from the chimney, Roland in the yard, shoveling a path from the steps to the gate. Inside the front window, Bishop lay on the rug near the stove, his head resting across Roland's old black boot left by the door. Lydia stood with one hand on the curtain and one at her mouth. After a moment, she stepped onto her own porch in slippers and a coat thrown over her nightdress. The cold hit her face, but she did not go back inside. She reached for the small bell she had hung by her own door years ago, the one she had once used to tease Everett when his brass bell rang too early. Her fingers closed around the cord. She pulled once. The note crossed Harbor Lane, thin and trembling in the morning air. Roland stopped shoveling. He looked over. Lydia did not wave. She only stood there with her red scarf loose around her neck, eyes shining, and let the sound fade. Inside, Bishop opened his eyes. His ears shifted toward the familiar note. For one heartbeat, the old habit moved through him. Then he saw Roland outside, the porch light above the door, the sign beneath it, the smoke rising from the chimney, and the road no longer empty in the same way. Bishop exhaled. He lowered his head back onto the boot and closed his eyes again. Brightwater Ridge continued waking around them. A truck started somewhere down the road. Mabel unlocked the grocery. Otto cursed at a frozen latch. Graham Voss lit his stove and would later deny needing anyone to check it. The lake shone white beneath the morning sun. Snow still covered everything, but the house at the end of Harbor Lane no longer looked abandoned to winter or memory. The light was on, and for the first time since Everett Hayes had been carried away through a storm, Bishop was not waiting outside for someone who could not come home. He was resting inside beside the man who had finally learned how to stay. Sometimes love does not end when someone leaves. Sometimes it stays behind in a porch light, a quiet habit, a faithful dog, or a door left open for someone who may need warmth. Bishop did not forget Everett. He simply learned that the promise had been passed on. And maybe that is one of God's quiet mercies in our own lives too. When loss feels too heavy to carry, He sends someone, somehow, to help us keep the light burning. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who or what has helped you keep going after loss. And if you want more stories of loyalty, healing, and hope, please subscribe and stay with us. May peace find your home tonight, and may a small light remain burning for you when the road feels cold.